Rowan used to believe that life followed a simple rhythm, the kind that moved steadily forward like a calm river. You worked hard, stayed patient, trusted the people around you, and eventually life rewarded you with something stable and meaningful. That belief had shaped the way Rowan lived. He never chased loud ambitions or grand dreams that demanded attention. Instead, he valued quiet victories, peaceful mornings, meaningful conversations, and the comfort of knowing tomorrow would not be very different from today. To Rowan, happiness was not a dramatic moment of triumph, it was the gentle consistency of a life that felt secure. For many years, life seemed to agree with him. His days moved in familiar patterns that made the world feel predictable and safe. The sun rose each morning over the same quiet streets, casting warm light across buildings that had stood for decades. Rowan would wake with a sense of purpose, believing that every small effort he made was another brick laid in the foundation of a stable future. He trusted the direction his life was moving, and perhaps most importantly, he trusted himself. But life rarely warns people before it begins to change. The first signs were small, almost unnoticeable at first. A plan that did not work out the way Rowan expected. A relationship that slowly drifted apart without a clear reason. A door that closed quietly when he thought it would remain open. At first, he told himself these things were temporary. After all, everyone experiences setbacks. Life would return to its usual rhythm soon enough. Yet the rhythm never returned. Instead, one difficulty quietly invited another. Weeks that once felt hopeful began to feel heavy. Opportunities that Rowan had once counted on disappeared. The structure that had held his life together slowly began to loosen, thread by thread, until the life he recognized started to unravel in ways he never imagined. Loss does not always arrive with loud chaos. Sometimes it arrives silently, slowly erasing the pieces of a life until one day a person looks around and realizes that almost everything has changed. That realization came to Rowan on an ordinary afternoon. The sky was gray, the streets were quiet, and the world seemed strangely distant. Rowan sat alone, staring at the familiar walls around him, and felt something he had never felt before, a deep sense of emptiness that settled into his chest like a weight. In the span of months, everything he had built had slipped away. The routines that once gave his life structure were gone. The plans that once gave him direction had dissolved. The connections that once made him feel supported had faded into silence. What remained was a quiet life that felt unfamiliar and uncertain. For the first time, Rowan did not know who he was without the things he had lost. At first, he tried to fight the feeling. He told himself that if he thought hard enough, worked hard enough, or tried long enough, he could somehow rebuild everything exactly as it had been before. He searched for ways to return to the life he once knew, as if the past were a door that could be reopened with enough effort. But the past does not work that way. The more Rowan tried to recreate the life he had lost, the more he realized that time only moves forward. Some chapters close without offering a second chance to return. That truth hurt more than the loss itself. There were long nights when Rowan lay awake in silence, replaying moments from the past in his mind. He wondered if there had been a single decision that changed everything. Perhaps he had overlooked something important. Perhaps he had trusted the wrong people. Perhaps he had simply been too certain that life would always remain steady. The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers. Yet the strange thing about losing everything is that it eventually leaves a person with nothing left to hold on to except themselves, and that is when the real journey begins. For a long time, Rowan resisted that realization. It was easier to blame circumstances or wish for the past than to face the quiet uncertainty of the present. But slowly, something began to shift inside him. It happened during a quiet morning when Rowan stepped outside before sunrise. The sky was pale and calm, and the world seemed to be holding its breath before the day truly began. For the first time in months, Rowan noticed how peaceful the morning felt. There was no rush, no noise, no expectations waiting for him. Only silence. Standing there in the cool air, Rowan realized something unexpected. Life had not ended when everything fell apart, that it had simply become different. That thought lingered in his mind for the rest of the day. It did not solve his problems or restore what he had lost, but it planted a small seed of curiosity that if his old life was gone, what kind of life could exist in its place? At first, Rowan did not know how to answer that question, but instead of trying to control everything again, he began doing something he had never truly done before. He started paying attention to the present moment. He walked through quiet streets without a destination, noticing details he had once ignored. The way sunlight warmed the pavement in the afternoon. The quiet laughter of strangers passing by. The simple rhythm of footsteps echoing in empty spaces. Before losing everything, Rowan had rushed through life, focused on goals that always seemed to exist somewhere in the future. Now, the future felt uncertain, and strangely, that forced him to notice the present. Day by day, Rowan began rebuilding something that had nothing to do with success or security. He began rebuilding himself. It started with small choices. Waking earlier. Taking long walks. Sitting quietly with his thoughts instead of running from them. These actions seemed insignificant, yet each one created a small sense of control in a life that once felt completely out of his hands. Through those quiet moments, Rowan discovered a truth that most people overlook while their lives are comfortable. Strength does not appear when everything is easy. Strength is built when life becomes difficult enough that a person has no choice but to grow. At first, Rowan's strength was fragile. Some days the weight of the past returned so heavily that he wondered if he was fooling himself by believing things could improve. But even on those difficult days, he noticed something important. He was still moving forward. That realization slowly changed the way he viewed his situation. Losing everything had once felt like the end of his story. But now it began to feel like a strange kind of beginning. Without the expectations that once defined him, Rowan was free to ask himself a new question: who did he truly want to become? The answer did not arrive immediately. It unfolded gradually through reflection and quiet determination. Rowan realized that much of his previous life had been shaped by the desire to maintain stability. He had avoided risks, avoided uncertainty, and avoided anything that might disrupt the calm routine he valued, but life had disrupted it anyway, and in doing so, it revealed something powerful. Safety alone is not enough to create a meaningful life. Meaning comes from growth. With that realization, Rowan began approaching each day differently. Instead of trying to rebuild the past, he focused on becoming stronger than the person he had been before. He challenged himself to learn patience, resilience, and gratitude in ways he had never needed to before. Slowly, his perspective began to change. The losses that once felt unbearable started to look different through the lens of growth. Each hardship had forced him to confront parts of himself he had previously ignored: his fears, his doubts, his tendency to avoid discomfort. Facing those things was painful, but it was also transformative. Rowan began to understand that losing everything had stripped away the illusions he once relied on. It removed the false sense of control he believed he had over life. It forced him to accept that uncertainty is not an enemy but a natural part of being alive. And within that uncertainty, there was something unexpected: possibility. The person Rowan had been before loss would never have discovered these lessons. That version of himself was comfortable, secure, and unaware of how fragile life could be, but the person he was becoming was different. This new Rowan understood that resilience is not the absence of hardship but the ability to continue moving forward despite it. He understood that identity should not depend on external success but on internal strength. And most importantly, he understood that losing everything does not erase a person's worth. Sometimes it reveals it. One evening, Rowan found himself watching another sunset. The sky slowly transformed from gold to deep purple, and the horizon glowed softly in the fading light. Months earlier, sunsets had reminded him of endings. Now they reminded him of something else: transformation. The day was ending, but the world was not disappearing. It was simply preparing for another cycle, another sunrise, another chance to begin again. Rowan smiled quietly to himself. For the first time since his life had fallen apart, he no longer felt like someone standing among ruins, that he felt like someone standing at the edge of a new path. And the most surprising realization of all was this: losing everything had not destroyed him. It had revealed the person he was capable of becoming. The strange thing about rebuilding a life is that it rarely happens in one dramatic moment. There is no single morning where a person wakes up suddenly healed, suddenly fearless, suddenly certain about the future. Instead, change happens quietly, through hundreds of small choices that seem insignificant at the time but slowly reshape the person making them. Rowan began to understand this truth as the months passed. The pain of losing everything had not disappeared, but it had softened. It was no longer a crushing weight that kept him frozen in place. Instead, it became something different, something that reminded him how far he had come. That he had started with nothing but uncertainty, yet day by day he had continued moving forward. At first, Rowan believed his greatest battle had been losing the life he once knew. But as time went on, he discovered something surprising. The real battle was not against circumstances or bad luck. The real battle was inside himself. There were moments when fear still whispered quietly in his mind. It would ask questions that felt difficult to answer. What if he failed again? What if rebuilding his life only led to another collapse? What if the strength he believed he was developing was only temporary? These doubts arrived like shadows during the quiet hours of the night. Rowan realized that fear does not disappear simply because someone decides to be brave. Fear is persistent. It follows people through their most uncertain moments, reminding them of past pain and future risks. But Rowan had learned something important during his journey. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. Courage means moving forward even when fear is present. Each time doubt appeared, Rowan refused to let it decide his direction. Instead, he treated it like a passing storm, something that might darken the sky for a while but would eventually move on if he remained patient. That he reminded himself of everything he had already survived. There had been a time when he believed losing everything would break him completely. Yet here he was, months later, still standing, still growing, still discovering new strength inside himself. That realization gave him a quiet confidence he had never felt before. The person Rowan had been before loss relied on external stability. His confidence came from routines, predictable outcomes, and the belief that life would continue smoothly. But the person Rowan was becoming relied on something deeper. Resilience is a quiet kind of strength. It does not shout or demand attention. It simply endures, adapting to change and learning from difficulty. Rowan noticed this strength appearing in unexpected ways. Challenges that once would have overwhelmed him now felt like opportunities to grow. Uncertainty no longer frightened him as much as it once had. Even failure, which he had once feared deeply, began to look different. Failure, Rowan realized, is not the opposite of success. It is part of the path that leads to it. The more Rowan reflected on his experiences, the more he understood how much losing everything had changed his perspective. In the past, he believed that success meant building a life where nothing went wrong. But that belief had been fragile. Life does not promise smooth roads. Instead, it offers people something far more meaningful, the chance to become stronger through the obstacles they face. Rowan began to see that his losses had stripped away illusions he once relied on. They removed the belief that comfort was permanent. They removed the expectation that life should always follow a predictable plan. What remained was something more honest. Life was unpredictable, sometimes difficult, and often uncertain, but it was also full of opportunities for growth. One evening, Rowan sat alone in a quiet park, watching people pass by as the sun dipped below the horizon. Children laughed in the distance, birds circled above the trees, and the soft breeze carried the peaceful sounds of the evening. Months earlier, Rowan would have looked at those moments and felt disconnected from them, as though happiness belonged to other people, but now something had changed. He realized that happiness was not a destination reserved for those whose lives were perfect. Happiness was something that could exist even in imperfect circumstances. It lived in small moments of gratitude. It appeared in quiet reflections. It grew whenever a person chose hope instead of despair. Rowan smiled as he watched the sky slowly darken. For the first time in a long time, he felt grateful for the journey he had endured, not because losing everything had been easy, but because it had taught him who he truly was. There is a powerful truth that many people do not discover until life forces them to face it. Identity is not built by what we own, the roles we play, or the stability we create. Identity is built by the choices we make when everything else disappears. When Rowan had lost the life he once relied on, he had been forced to look inward for answers. That search had been painful, confusing, and exhausting at times, But it had also revealed a strength he never knew existed. He was not defined by the things he had lost, that he was defined by the person he chose to become afterward. This realization changed the way Rowan approached the future. Instead of worrying about whether life would become stable again, he focused on something far more meaningful, becoming someone who could handle whatever life might bring. He began reading, reflecting, and learning about the ways people transform through adversity. He discovered stories of individuals who had faced unimaginable difficulties yet emerged stronger and wiser. Those stories reminded him that he was not alone in his experience. Loss is something nearly every person encounters at some point in life. Some lose careers, others lose relationships, and many lose the sense of certainty they once believed was permanent. But those moments of loss often become the turning points that reshape people's lives. Rowan realized that adversity had given him a rare opportunity, that he could either spend the rest of his life mourning what he had lost, or he could use the experience as a foundation for something new. He chose the second path. Each day, Rowan focused on becoming slightly stronger than he had been the day before. Some days the progress felt small, almost invisible. But over time, those small improvements began to transform him. His mindset became calmer. His thoughts became clearer. His fears became quieter. Most importantly, his sense of purpose began to grow. Rowan realized that the lessons he had learned through loss were valuable not only for himself but for others as well. Many people around him were struggling in their own silent battles, unsure of how to move forward after difficult experiences. He began sharing his thoughts with those who needed encouragement. Sometimes it was through simple conversations, offering a few honest words to someone who felt lost. Other times it was through quiet acts of support that reminded people they were not alone. Rowan did not consider himself a hero or a teacher. He was simply someone who had walked through darkness and discovered that light still existed on the other side. Over time, something remarkable happened. The pain that once felt like the end of his story became the beginning of a new purpose. People began to notice the calm confidence Rowan carried with him. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was unmistakable. He spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who understood that life's hardships are not meant to destroy us, they are meant to shape us. One afternoon, as Rowan walked along a familiar path, he paused to reflect on how much had changed. There had been a time when losing everything felt like the greatest tragedy he could imagine. He believed his story had ended in failure, that the life he had built had collapsed beyond repair. But standing there in the gentle afternoon sunlight, Rowan saw things differently. Losing everything had not been the end. It had been the moment that forced him to become the strongest version of himself. The person he had been before loss was cautious, comfortable, and unaware of how much strength existed inside him. The person he had become was resilient, thoughtful, and deeply aware that life's greatest lessons often come from its hardest moments. Rowan realized that the title of his story was not about loss at all. It was about transformation. Because sometimes the most powerful version of ourselves is the one we discover only after everything else disappears. As the sun began to set once again, Rowan looked toward the horizon with a sense of calm determination. He no longer feared the unknown future. Instead, he welcomed it. Life had already shown him that he could survive losing everything, which meant he could also survive whatever came next, and that realization gave him something far more valuable than the life he once had. It gave him unshakable confidence in himself. Rowan took a slow breath, feeling the cool evening air around him. For the first time in his life, he understood a truth that many people spend years searching for. Sometimes life takes everything away not to punish us, but to reveal the strength we never knew we possessed, and the person we become after losing that everything is often stronger, wiser, and more alive than the person we were before. Rowan smiled quietly as he continued walking forward, because now he knew something with absolute certainty. His story was not about what he had lost. It was about who he had become, and the person he had become was someone who could face any storm, rise from any fall, and continue moving forward no matter how difficult the road might be. That was the person Rowan had discovered within himself, and that was the person he would remain for the rest of his life.